Okay, hi everyone. That's a lot of pressure there, but I'll make do. So, hi everyone. So, I'm Malika Favre. I'm originally from Paris and I moved to London 10 years ago. So, I would describe my style quite quickly as being minimalistic, bold and colorful, pop, sexy, very often, but most importantly, always with a bit of narrative. So I was asked to come here and talk about 2014, and honestly, I had no idea. So I was like, okay, I'm going to just look at numbers and see what comes of it. So I realized that it's actually my 4th year of being an independent illustrator. This year, I had 51 new clients, and I did 86 projects, which is actually quite a lot. Some of them really small, some of them bigger, but when I looked actually at it, I saw it was quite mental. 0 is actually the number of exhibitions I did this year. 2 years ago, I did my first solo show at a chemistry gallery around the corner, Hide and Seek. And last year, I did the Kama Sutra exhibition at Somerset House. And it's something that's very important to me. So the reason why I didn't do anything this year is partly because I had 86 projects, but also because I took 6 very long holidays. So that's my holiday. Everyone's gonna hate me. So I first went to the Caribbean, then did like a road trip in California, went hiking in France, see the family in Corsica, then did another road trip in Italy, and finally went to Morocco. I think I really needed a break. I really needed to see something else than London. So basically today, I decided that I'm actually gonna talk to you about one project, which is kind of a good mix of taking holidays and doing hard work. So back in July, I got an email from this Tenerife-based design studio called 28 y Medio, saying, telling me about a project which was called On the Draw. And what it involved was 7 illustrators, each with quite different styles, so as you can see. So that's kind of work from the 7 illustrators they wanted to involve. And each of us was going to be sent to the Canary Island. So the plan was like, you're sent to the Canary Island, you're actually paired up with a local artist from the island that you're being sent to, which is actually secret, for 1 week. And after that week, you have to come back with 6 illustrations of your choice. You could do whatever you want. It was a completely open brief. So it was back in June. I actually thought it was a spam, because it just sounded too good to be true. And then I actually realized it wasn't. It sounded like the website sounded quite legit. And I was actually free that week, so I said yes. So what I did is in July, actually, I flew to Tenerife, where I got to meet all the other illustrators and also the team from the design studio. And we kind of spent 2 days, just exploring Tenerife and having a look around and getting to know each other and understand the project. And as we were going around, I started taking lots of pictures because that's the way that's kind of my process and the way I work. So I had my camera and I was starting taking pictures and I was amazed by, all the colors and the contrast. Obviously it was amazing sky, beautiful, and everything was really interesting. I started seeing shadows and really graphic elements that I thought I'm going to use in my work. And I started doing this kind of collage. And, after a couple of days, I felt really good. And I was like, I can very clearly see what I'm going to do there. But actually, Tenerife wasn't my island. I was going to be sent to Fuerteventura. And, when I first said yes, the first thing I did was Google image the Canary Island, because I had never been. And I saw that, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going. And then I took the plane, I left the other illustrators behind, and I got to Fuerteventura, and when I landed, this is what was waiting for me. It's only an hour flight. Huh? And then, so basically my host picked me up and, we kept driving around and it was more of that. And then we got into the mountains and there are lots of goats because they do lots of goat cheese. And I got quite scared. I got quite anxious. I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do with that. But then I kind of thought, okay, let's not freak out. And, I'm just going to start by, doing the usual process and, let's take pictures and see things that I find interesting. So I started looking at, patterns on the sand, and it's such a strong, there is such a strong wind that you actually have these really interesting lines. And then over the next week, I just went around and started doing this collage of, things I saw. And it all there was a vibe that was starting to come out of that. So we went to the mountains and we saw the goat, we saw how they make cheese. And then, we just kept going everywhere, and everywhere was this really muted color palette. There was no colorful houses, nothing. The only thing that was really bright was actually the sky. And then the only thing that really brought contrast was, most of the houses were white, which created really interesting shadows. And of course, here and there, I could see some hints of colors and, things that I thought I could use, markings, extra. So I just kept going, and, at the end, that was one of the gray palettes that I found interesting. And then at the end of my week, I kind of had this, I had this massive puzzle of images that, when I looked back at it, on my way back, I thought, okay, I'm going to start from that, and that's what's going to guide the process. So the first thing I did is extract a color palette. And it was, of course, more muted, but it was, a color that came about because of the island, and it had to be true to the island. I couldn't just make it up. And then the other thing that I found really interesting was I had these 3 pictures that I randomly put next to each other, and I thought there was something, very intriguing in the way these 3 shapes echo each other and look very similar, even though they are, one is from a rock, one is from a shadow, and one is from the sea on the black beach. So I took that as a starting point of my process, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna, create a base for my illustrations, and I'm gonna draw this one line that's gonna be the same in every single illustration. And I'm gonna try to tell the story with that one single line. So around that line, I could do, a beach and the sea, but I could also do the road in the mountains, and even, a harbor and a kind of, I don't know what you call that, like the wooden thing in a harbor. But it could also tell me how I was going to build the architecture, because I knew I wanted to talk about all those different, parts of the island that were as important as each other. And then in terms of the narrative and the content, I actually drew up on, personal experience. So actually the girl at the top left is the daughter of my host, Ines, and we went to this massive dune, and she was running up that dune like a crazy girl, and so it was a really interesting moment. And then all these other pictures are from moments in my week. So I started my first illustration by just sketching it out really roughly and thinking there is something that very interesting about that, that line going through the image, and also, that human presence. So I did kind of very rough images and thought, okay, I think it's going to work. So now I'm going to set myself a brief, because I quite like setting myself a brief, probably because I come from graphic design originally. So my brief was each illustration was going to contain one element of wind, one living animal or human element, one natural element like the sea or the sand, and one man-made element like the road or a surfboard or anything. And then I just, I got cracking and I started drawing them. And so the first illustration was the one of the dunes, where Ines actually became this surfer girl who is going to meet the little kite at the other end of the, of the dunes. And then the second one was the architecture. So again, with that, the element of wind brought by the towel and a little bird flying. And so I kept on going, and every single one was based on that very rigid structure, and then I kind of gave myself some freedom to do something else. And I love that one because I had to draw a goat. There had to be a goat in my series, just because it would be a lie that they are everywhere. So I just thought I'm going to have one goat crossing the road, which never happens. But, there are always like 150 of them. But I just thought it was, that's my living element, and that's quite interesting. And then also you have that little windmill at the top, which you find in Fuerteventura. And here, for example, I didn't know, but I had to hide a little bird in that just little hole of it's like a very traditional church. So even if it's not obvious, and even if no one notices it, they all contain these 4 elements. And so in the end, we, printed them really nicely. Then I gathered all the sketches, because that was kind of all those collages were my way of sketching it. And I sent it to the design studio in Tenerife. And what they actually did is they received all the illustrations from all 7 illustrators. And I love when those projects are, when everyone goes the extra mile to make it extra nice. And what they did is actually packaged everything in a vintage suitcase with little labels everywhere. And I just thought it was such a nice touch. And one of the illustrators had a hat that everyone could draw on. And the funny thing is that after seeing the illustration, actually the tourism board of the Canary Islands thought it was such a great, mix of styles, and it was such a good reflection of of all the Canary, that they decided to set up an exhibition. And the first exhibition they did was in London, and it was actually in that exact place, completely randomly. So it was at Protein Studio, and it was probably about a month ago. And I thought it was a really nice way to wrap it up and to really see all of them coming together and see what everyone's been up to. So that's it for my year.